talk about what it's like to be a parent to a sacral being and things that I pay attention to according to his design and in terms of how I want to show up as a parent for him. I do think that it's important to acknowledge a couple of different things about who I am and who my son is, or what I am and what my son is, and a little bit about our circumstance so you can see how much of this conversation you're going to be able to relate to. Now, my design, I'm a 3/6 splenic projector. It might be worth noting that I'm a single channel and it's a tribal channel, which means that I'm here for support. Because I'm a projector, I'm a non-energy type. Because I have a 3/6 profile, my conscious personality line is a third line. So I am someone who is always going to make mistakes. And it's not wrong or bad that that's how I learn things. The third line process is here to learn what doesn't work. It's not that I'm meant to consistently fail over and over again. It's that I'm meant to figure out what's not working and then kind of like tweak it from there, not just keep failing at it. Now, my son is a 3/5 manifesting generator with a pure sacral authority. Now, his name is Maven, and he also has a couple of channels. He's got way more definition than I do, and his channels are either collective or individual. Now, the core of where I want my attention to go for this video is on raising a sacral being with the help or assistance of human design. So I'm gonna give, some personal backstory. This video is gonna have a lot of personal stuff in it. This is gonna be actually one of the least mechanically driven videos I've ever done. And it's gonna be so much more about my experience, and I don't know how long I'm gonna go for. So part of what's relevant to this is right now Maven is 9 years old. And I only found out about human design 5 years ago. So right off the bat, Maven was not born with me knowing what he was and how to immediately support him in that process. I didn't know what I was, and that's part of my way of saying I didn't necessarily know what my needs were or how to support myself in this process. Now, some more interesting backstory here is that I found human design right after I got into my Saturn return. And so if you know anything about Saturn return, it is basically when you get a bit of a supportive correction happening in your life that realigns you to your correct path. And if you have been living a life that's quite out of alignment up until this point, you tend to really feel the changes that are about to happen. If you have been living in a way that is not according to your own natural law, you're going to get a bit of assistance from Saturn to put a few things back into place that support you in living the life you're meant to live. Now, prior to Saturn return, like most of my 20s were spent with Maven's father. And I have not really studied his chart. I have an aversion to studying his chart, but I have had a glance. And he is a 6/2 pure manifesting generator. So I know right off the bat his profile and what his type is. Now, I built a life with this person that is quite different from the kind of life that I live now. And there was one very nice element to this where when we had Maven, my husband went to work, like back to work immediately, and I became the stay-at-home mom. I really, 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 really wanted to be a mom. And it wasn't even like, I want this. It was like, I knew it was going to happen. I have a very strong maternal drive. I identify with that very, very much. Like, that is a core part of who I am. And in fact, the day that I got pregnant with Maven, I knew earlier in the day that I was gonna get pregnant. I was like, I'm getting pregnant today. I mean, it's a funny way to say it, I guess. But I got pregnant that night. And my pregnancy with Maven was better than I knew could be possible. It was certainly better than I hoped for. It was better than I anticipated. Being my first pregnancy, I didn't know too much about how it was supposed to go or what it was supposed to feel like. But my story of my pregnancy, in comparison to most other stories that I've heard, I really liked being pregnant. I might have had heartburn a little bit. Like, I had an exceptional pregnancy, and in true ManiGen fashion, when Maven was born, I'll swear that kid tried to skip a couple of steps. It was 4.5-hour labor. I'm like, yeah, maybe don't go too much into the labor story in a YouTube video, but it's comical. You know, maybe one day I'll go more into it. But he was ready to come out faster than anybody was prepared for. And I had a phenomenal birth experience. Like, I truly, truly did. From the time Maven was out, like, immediately, I was so in love. Like, absolutely in love with my child. And I knew that it was going to be really, really hard for any other kind of love to measure up to what I was feeling in regards to how I felt about Maven. Like, he became my world immediately. Now, it's because I didn't have human design awareness then, it's actually really interesting for me to look back at some of these things and see the mechanics at play. You know, a projector is here for a one-to-one relationship. Like, these are very, very deep relationships. And when projectors, when we lock our focus onto something, like, the whole rest of the world gets forgotten about in a way. You know, Ra has this joke, like, you put a projector in a room with 2 other people and right away they're screwed because they can only focus on one person at a time. Now, there are nuances to that, like projectors with alpha channels. However, Maven became my one-to-one world. He was my everything, and I was so deeply focused on raising him, being a good mom to him. And in many ways, like, he became my project. Like, I wanted to experiment with so many things with him. I wanted to play with so many things. I was so excited about things like when he would transition from, like, breastfeeding, he went straight to a cup. There was no sippy cup. He never took a soother. I thought, like, getting him to sleep in his own bed was really interesting. From the get-go, I had an aversion to co-sleeping. I had absolutely zero interest in co-sleeping. Now, Maven is a sacral being. I am not. I'm not surprised that I wanted him near enough that I could hear him, but not so near that he would be in my bubble all the time. I can see how I was very, very focused on anything that felt like his intelligence or his education. Like, learning how to do certain things independently for himself were really important to me. Not that I wanted him to be without me, I wanted to see how capable he was. And I was not a helicopter parent in the sense where, like, I'm not hovery around him. This is where I can see my third line nature very, very clearly, as in, I really like letting kids experiment. I like letting them try things. Even when they wipe out, I'm not rushing over like, are you okay? Because that reaction, like, freaks them out. Like, oh no, am I not okay? You know, I wait to see how he would respond to certain things. I'd assist him if he required it of me. I loved, like, seeing his mind developed and seeing how quickly he like acquired skills at certain things. Like he was excellent at math from an incredibly young age. Like, you know, even just little things like we'd be in a restaurant and I would know that he would need things to respond to. And if he didn't have something to respond to, he would be more distracting for me. And so we would do things together, like we'd take the little tiny creamer cups and we would do like little math, like 1 and 2 is 3, and like we would count those things together. But he had such a knack for it. Or we would take the little creamers and we would build them into pyramids and stuff. I'm like, little generator building. There's so many cool ways that I'm able to look back and be like, man, I didn't know necessarily that, like, I wasn't looking for the uh-huh or but I knew what his response was. I knew what it was for him to be really satisfied. And I'll be honest, Maven as a child was rarely frustrated, like rarely frustrated. When I think about Maven's like emotional temperament, when he was just with me, I borderline never saw anything that would present as what we would think is negative behavior. Maven has never been defiant. He has never been a tantrum kid. He's never been a yeller. He's never, like, that's just not who he is. And when I think about certain aspects of our design together, like, I'm not emotional. So he has no emotional definition of mine to be amplifying. He's not emotional, so he's not creating any type of emotional energy. He doesn't have changing moods. He doesn't have high and low moods. There was actually very little like emotional change in our environment. It's funny because I want to say the words like emotional dysregulation, but in theory, like there wasn't really emotional energy around our house. So a lot of what we were dealing with in terms of like how we felt or not was kind of limited to not self-theme. Like, was I feeling bitter for being unrecognized, or was Maven feeling frustrated because of not being able to use his energy correctly? But for the first 3 years of Maven's life, we lived on a farm, and I did the farm stuff while my husband worked a construction job. I was very, very busy on my, albeit little, farm. We raised rabbits, chickens, turkeys, pigs. I had a garden. Like there was a lot of consistent work that went into this, but I didn't have a regular job to tend to. And so it was very pleasurable work. It was tiring work, but it was pleasurable work. And it gave Maven a lot of opportunity to be stimulated. He had a lot of different things consistently in his environment to be able to respond to. And when kids are little, like it's much easier to have generator kids in that these generator kids have a tendency to present the way that we expect children to be, which is like a want to play, a want to be more creative. Like when you're buying things like Lego or blocks for kids, there's an expectation that they're going to be creative and build things with them. Maven was exactly what I was hoping for in having a kid. Now, one of the things that is so obvious to me that Maven is an MG, manifesting generator, is that Maven is a motor mouth. There is clearly motor to throat definition. The kid is an outrageous motor mouth. Now the beautiful thing, and a lot of why this is coming up now is because I've started to notice it a lot more recently. And it's very like affirming, it's very validating in that Maven talks to himself. Maven talks a lot to himself. His manifesting generator channel is the one pure MG channel, which is a channel of charisma, gate 34 to gate 20. That is direct power to who he is in the now. And he has always been a like kind of kid. Whether he was in the bath as a little kid or as he got older, he would be in the shower. You know, as a parent, I've got the door open so that I can be aware of whether or not he needs me for anything. And so often I would think that he was asking for me. I would think that he was needing me. And as I would approach the door, I'd realize he's not talking to me. He's just talking to himself, to the wall, to the echo, to whatever. But he's just talking or singing or making sound effects. Like the kid makes a lot of sound effects. And sometimes I would record these because I was like, man, like who does this? You know, I don't do this. But that was back at the point when I didn't know that, you know, we were different. I didn't know I was a projector. I didn't know he was a sacral being. I didn't know any of this stuff about human design. And so it's so funny to look back and be like, man, that kid has always been a motor mouth. But when he's in a good place, when he's in a satisfied place, when he's in a regulated place, he just, like, this is such a sign of him being so happy and satisfied and like feeling good about what he is and who he is. And I have noticed recently, he has started like talking to himself more, sing-songing to himself more. He's 9 years old now. And so I've got, at this point, like, we've got it pretty well established. Like, I know when he needs me. I know when he needs me because it starts with, hey, mom. Like, that's my name. I don't even get called mom. I get, hey, mom. So unless that is the precursor to what he's about to say, I don't really need to pay attention. And it's better that I don't. I leave him in his little world. He leaves me in my little world. Now, if I focus on when I found design, and not even just found it, like found it and knew enough about it to be able to integrate some very rudimentary basics, like, oh, I'm someone who needs to wait to be recognized and invited. Okay, that's my strategy. That's how I'm supposed to engage with the world. Like, you know, if I'm going to, like, because we're keeping this pretty kid related, you know, if I'm going to bump into another mom at a play group or preschool or daycare or whatever, like, how I would go about things is very different from how I would encourage other people to go about things. Or, you know, if I'm trying to teach Maven how to make a friend, how I would encourage him to do that is very different than how I will encourage myself to make a friend. And so right off the bat, there are things that start to come up where I'm like, I'm going to raise my kid according to one belief, and I'm going to raise and or support myself in accordance with another belief. So it's not as simple as like, hey Maven, this is how you make friends. Because I do start to get into some more specific mechanics. I do start to let these things influence my parenting. When I'm thinking, Maven, this is how you're gonna make a friend, it has so much to do with like, do you like that person? Are you attracted to that person? And he's too young to understand intimately. We're understanding like energetically right now. Are you interested in them? And you know, I can ask him questions like, do you want to talk to them? Do you want to play with them? Do you want to share your toys with them? And so we could start to generate some reactions, some responses to certain things, and that I could encourage him to go do that. But if I say, would you like to be friends with that person? And he goes, well, then I don't really need to push him out of that zone. I don't really need to go encourage that because he's given me a no. And so what human design gave me in terms of Maven's mechanics was a very clear understanding that he would have responses for things. And because his sacral is his authority, that response would be something that I could trust in that given moment. And I didn't need to make him explain himself or try and dig into it to understand it. Like I could just accept his answer for what it was. Now, Maven's father and I separated when he was 4, and we were divorced by the time he was 5. We cohabitated for a while post-separation, and we bought the place that I'm in now. Where I live, we bought this place together, and about 2 months after we bought this place, I said that I wanted a divorce. And we parted ways. That's the shortest version of it. Now, one thing that I am fortunate in is that my ex-husband and I, well, we may not have enough in common or enough, you know, there's no relationship for us anymore. We both prioritize being parents to Maven pretty well above everything else. We don't really have disagreements when it comes to Maven. We have some struggles, like for a while I wanted to homeschool Maven, and that was rejected by his father, and I was given the opportunity to take it to court or not, but I wasn't in a place where that felt like the right direction to go in. I accepted the circumstance for what they were. We have some, different viewpoints, but we do both have a genuine love for our son that makes us reasonably good co-parents. Now, I found human design after my separation, so there was no influence of human design in my relationship, but it did bring a lot of understanding to what wasn't working in the relationship, and it gave me some awareness of how I would get through co-parenting. Now, my ex and I have, like I said, some differing viewpoints. Like, I have a willingness to try and support Maven based on what his mechanics and his body graph are. My ex-husband, not knowing human design, he has a tendency to want to raise him based on his own conditioning. I went to public school, so my son needs to go to public school, and there's no question about that. Like, there's more of a pattern, it's more traditional. Traditional is a nice way to say homogenized. But my ex-husband looks at my son like he's a 9-year-old boy. And that's what his labeling is. Whereas when I look at Maven, I see a 3/5 pure MG cross of the sleeping phoenix kid with individual and collective circuitry and hope motivation and hot thirst determination and valleys environment. Like, I see Maven in a much more unique and differentiated way according to his design. And I also don't believe in creating rules based on like what the chart says. I, only being 5 years into design, I see myself as very, very new still. Like, I still feel very much like a baby in this system. I'm still learning. I'm still experimenting. I'm still testing this out for myself. And I would feel absolutely terrible if I raised Maven strictly according to a system that I later found a flaw in. I don't want to be like that. To me, it's like raising a kid according to a hardcore religion with rules, and then, you wake up one day and you decide you don't want to believe in that religion, but that's what you raised your kids according to. Like, I'm not interested in having to undo all of that potential. Ugh. Ugh. So, I raised Maven according to design with a grain of salt. Let's say that. Everything in my life is with a grain of salt. Being a consecutive appetite, I only put salt on things. Literally, my life is like with a grain of salt at this point. I'm interested in including Maven in my human design experiment. I'm interested in like shopping things to him according to his strategy and authority, and seeing what happens. I know through design that if he's a pure generator type, a pure ManiGen, a pure sacral being, then he is going to have a response in the moment that says either yes or uh-huh, I have energy to generate here, I have a want for this, I can use my energy here and it will satisfy me, or I'm gonna get a ugh, and that's his way of saying, I don't have energy for that. I don't have a response for that. I'm not generating anything for that. And it will only frustrate me for you to put that on me. And so while I can play with my own mechanics as a projector, and that gives me a level of information to validate this whole system with, I also get to loosely play with the mechanics of the child that I am the entrusted guardian to. Like when I think about what the parent's role is, I don't think it's the parent's job to completely control everything about our kids and make them turn out a certain way, especially, you know, for our approval or not. I really prefer to look at parents like entrusted guardians. You are the person elected parent, and I'll be honest, like it's a privilege. It's absolutely a privilege to be a parent. And I take my role really seriously. One of the ways in which I respect Maven as an autonomous being is through his diet type. So determination is what we're referring to when we'll talk about how someone is supposed to eat in human design. There are 6 different determinations, and they have a leftness or rightness, which has more nuanced information to it. But Maven is left in his brain. He has an active brain and a 3rd color determination, which means he is hot thirst determination. Now that doesn't mean that he's necessarily meant to take in hot things. It means that he's meant to consume things above body temperature. So that doesn't necessarily mean hot. And you know, it's opposite, cold thirst. It doesn't necessarily mean cold things. It means below body temperature. So we could have like a 2-degree range here, and it would be better for one kid or better for the other one. Knowing that Maven is hot thirst, but also knowing I don't have firsthand experience of what that determination is. Like I'm consecutive determination, I'm a 1st color. So I know that I don't know what it's like to need food according to the way that he needs food. And so for me to tell him what is correct for him can honestly feel like a gross overstepping of his boundaries, because I would be pushing something on him that I truly don't have a personal ability to relate to. I can only use his strategy and his authority to test this out for him, to help him test this out for himself. I can ask him things and he can respond. You know, if I were to say to him, you know, would you rather have this or this? He's either going to say yes to one or no to one, or I'll take this or that one, or he'll say none or eh. And you know, learning that Maven is a manifesting generator versus a standard generator. Manifesting generators typically need more options, more variety, more things to respond to. Sometimes if you give a manifesting generator a this or that option, they look at you like maybe you weren't smart enough to give them more options, which would be accurate. You know, if I say to Maven, are you hungry? That's a yes or no question. So he'll be like, eh, which means not yet. Or he'll be like, no. But usually it's like, well, what are we gonna have? You know, him being hungry, he already knows like the answer to that is based more on, well, what's the option for him to eat? So if I say something like, you know, would you like Annie's? Or would you like pizza? Or would you like a quesadilla? All three of those options are warm foods. They're going to vary in temperature. They're all above body temperature. And that gives him like, ooh, you know, I get the ooh. And he'll pick very quickly. Like he doesn't, like he doesn't get up in his head about his decisions. He's not old enough to get into his head to think about why he may or may not want certain foods. He's not really thinking about like, you know, his fitness or his nutrition, or he's literally thinking like, what's going to activate a response in him. Now, Maven is also smell cognition. If I can't get Maven to decide something, like if I take a new food and I say, do you want to try this? I get, eh. But if I say, do you want to smell this? No matter what, he will always say yes. He always wants to smell it. But that smell will validate a response of like, that smells good. Like, can I have that? Or like, ew, that smells gross. I'm not interested in that. And Maven is very, very, very much in his smell cognition. I am amazed sometimes when he walks into a room and he goes, it smells like this and this and this in here. I'm like, how did he pick up those three totally different things? Like, I can't do that. I'm taste cognition, right? So I'm consistently validated with aspects of Maven's design where I'm like, damn, like he is what this body graph says that he is. This is really cool. Now, because I don't get involved in how my ex-husband parents, I'm not invited there. I'm not recognized as a contributor in how he should be parenting. And I don't insert myself where I'm not recognized and invited. I simply do my best to do my best in what I have. So when Maven is here with me, and we split Maven 50-50, when Maven is here with me, it's really interesting to hear the natural, I would say, feedback that I get from Maven, but it feels like recognition. Maven has voluntarily said things to me like, I prefer eating here because you let me choose what I'm gonna eat. And so what he's acknowledging there, whether he has the mechanical understanding of it or not, is that I'm giving him the options to respond to, and he's letting me know that he likes that, he appreciates that. And that feels validating for me in terms of how I'm trying to raise him. You know, when I think about, you know, raising a kid, raising a sacral being, we have there are a few categories that we can look at. Like, what's it like to have them in school? What's it like to feed them? What's it like to get them to go to bed? What's it like to help them make friends? And so that's some of the observational awareness that I have to provide. You know, how I deal with Maven and bedtime. Maven has always been a fantastic sleeper. Like, going to bed has never been a problem for Maven. He never fought me on the time. He never tried to, you know, stay up really late. But I also think that he's a kid who uses his sacral energy well. So when it is time for him to go to bed, he's gotten enough energy out. He's gotten enough stimulation out of him that he's ready to go to sleep. The sacral has been used, he's exhausted, he goes to bed, and he wakes up very recharged. This is not a kid who sleeps in. He goes to bed relatively early and he wakes up quite early. Like, he'll go to bed at 8:30 and he is very like naturally up and ready to go for the day at 6 a.m. As a baby, man, he was like born to be a farm baby because he was up with the sun and down with the sun. Like, he's a very typical solar being. And he is a classic builder. Like, he loves to build things. He loves to play with natural elements. He's a 9-year-old who still really loves a sandbox, who likes driving, you know, RC excavators, who likes building bike jumps. Like, he's a typical respond, busybody, put his energy into it, feel so satisfied by it, and then he crashes for bedtime. Now, if I could tell that Maven has a lot of he's never really got a lot of energy at nighttime, but we're getting to the point where like I'm tired earlier than he is. I'm ready to go to bed at like 8:30, and he, you know, would love to stay up and watch a movie or play a video game or read a book. Like he wants to, he's getting a little bit more nocturnal as he's getting older. I think he actually just really likes the downtime in his room and doing something. So Valley's environment, when he's chilling out in his own space, it has a lot to do with the acoustics of what's going on. We had a very, very funny moment a couple months ago where he tucked me into bed. I have tucked that kid into bed every night that I have ever been his mom and he's been with me. It's, you know, I'm pretty like routine and ritual. Good night, love you, see you in the morning. Like he hears the same things all the time. But based on our energy usage, I just kind of am like, I'm kind of done for the day before he is now. And he tucked me in recently, and I just thought that was like the cutest, sweetest thing. And also I had such a weird sadness about it because my role with him is shifting. He won't necessarily require the level of consistency, structure, attention. Like as he becomes more independent, I have these kind of like proud, sad moments where I can see that I'm not as necessary for him, and I don't have any more kids. You know, for all the wonderful things that I said about how my pregnancy went with Maven, when Maven was 6 months old, I was already pregnant again, and I had a miscarriage. And I had many miscarriages. Many miscarriages. And they were really hard for me when they happened because I felt like I was doing something wrong. I felt like I was bad. I felt like I wasn't healthy enough, even though I was a complete health nut. Like I just felt inadequate. And it's so interesting because now that I know what I know about my own mechanics, and also knowing like what Maven was going to require of me to be the kind of parent that I wanted to be, with the level of involvement I wanted to have in his life, I don't have it in me to have more than him. And I like literally like, that's why I couldn't keep my pregnancies. I literally don't have it in me to do that again or to do that for many kids. Like Maven is such a blessing for me, and I can totally see now based on some of our mechanics, like Maven is a blessing for me in ways that I didn't even have any clue how to comprehend at the time. Like as a projector, we are here to guide sacral beings. But if I didn't have my own sacral being who consistently asks for and wants my guidance, like Maven is like an active experiment for me in this system all the time. We're both third lines. We're both people who love to trial and error our learning experience. We're moving into the Cross of the Sleeping Phoenix, and I got a Cross of the Sleeping Phoenix kid. Like, there are so many cool things that I'm able to see now that I have such different feelings about how I got to this point. Like, the journey is so much more entertaining to look back on now. Raising a sacral being has so much to do with respecting their mechanics, asking them the questions that lead them to having a response, letting them live that response out, and see for themselves like how that works for them, how that feels for them. I don't think about raising Maven in terms of like the qualities that I want him to have as he grows up. I will feel like I have done my job as a parent if Maven is able to grow up and trust his sacral response. And I mean trust that to the point where he's defensive about it, where he recognizes people that don't give him the same liberty, and he breaks the bond with those people. He rejects those people. He does. I'm not trying to, I am trying to raise a child that has enough self-love and enough self-understanding and enough self-respect that he doesn't question that he is his own authority. If that's what I get to give him, I will be so proud of myself as a mom. Yeah, that feels good for today.